Welcome, 8th graders, to today's Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to be with you guys today. So let's jump right in because we're looking at something truly fascinating. We're going to see how God takes incredibly difficult, kind of messy situations and literally uses them to create the most amazing opportunities imaginable. We're exploring this beautiful passage in Romans chapter 11, verses 11 through 16. And you guys, it is this epic story of a stumble, a rescue mission, and a door that was swung wide open for the entire world. Get ready because this is definitely going to change how you look at both failure and grace.
Okay, here's our lesson plan for today's journey. We'll start with a stumbling block, move into the open door, look at Paul's great hope, and then wrap it all up with humility over pride and what it means to be the godly learner. So I want to kick things off by having you think about this crucial question. What came to the Gentiles through Israel's stumbling? Keep this in the back of your mind as we go. Think about what a stumble usually means for a second. It usually means a fall, right? A total mistake, a failure. But in God's hands, well, a stumble does something completely unexpected. Let's see what that actually is.
Jumping into section 1, a stumbling block, and how God's plan never fails. We really need to grasp this powerful truth right out of the gate. What looks like a total failure to us is absolutely never a failure in God's plan. And our memory verse for today brilliantly illustrates that point. It's Romans 11:11. Through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Paul is dropping something totally mind-blowing here about the nation of Israel. When they stumbled in recognizing Jesus as the Messiah, it didn't mean God's plan just, crashed and burned. Not at all. God took that exact situation and used it to launch this massive, overarching rescue mission for everyone else, the Gentiles. Let's make sure we're totally clear on what this word means here. In our lesson, stumbling is a difficult situation that God used to open the door of salvation to the rest of the world. Israel's stumbling was basically a setup for mercy, not an accident. Think about it. Have you ever tripped, but you kind of caught your balance and actually ended up a few steps further ahead than you were before? That's what happened here. God took a spiritual stumble and used it to propel his love outward to all the nations on earth. All right, moving to section 2, the open door, mercy for all nations. We've seen the stumble, so let's check out what that stumble actually opened up. I want you to literally picture this in your head right now. Imagine this giant, towering stone doorway, right? And carved right above it are the words, God's mercy. Now, for a super long time, it seemed like only one specific group of people was standing right in front of it. But suddenly, because of this incredible pivot in history we just talked about, that massive door swings wide open. And now millions of people from every single country, speaking every language, are being invited to walk right through it. That is the opportunity for all nations to hear the gospel and come to Jesus Christ. So here is how we connect the dots. Israel stumbled, sure, but God's wisdom and mercy totally prevailed over that stumble. And because of that prevailing wisdom, the door opened for all nations. It just goes to show us that God is so infinitely wise. He can take a roadblock and turn it into a literal superhighway for his grace. Now, let's step into section 3, Paul's great hope, stirring hearts. We're going to shift gears slightly and look at the Apostle Paul himself and what his deep personal motivation was. Here's a question to challenge you guys. Why did Paul care so deeply about both Gentiles and Israel? I mean, Paul was Jewish himself, but he was specifically called by God to be the apostle to the Gentiles, to the non-Jewish world. So why was he carrying this heavy burden for both groups? Well, the answer is that God's mercy is not small. He desires both Jews and Gentiles to respond with surrendered faith. And what's really fascinating about Paul's strategy is how he describes it. Do you remember that word jealousy from our memory verse earlier? Paul's intense ministry to the Gentiles was actually meant to stir the hearts of his fellow Israelites. By showing them how powerfully God was moving among the Gentiles, he hoped to, wake his own people up. He wanted them to see the beauty of the gospel and turn back to God through Jesus. God still cared deeply for Israel, and for sure, Paul did too. Let's transition to section 4, humility over pride. This is where we bring the theology right down into our daily, real-world lives. How are we supposed to act when we walk through that open door of mercy? I want you to stop and think about your own attitude for a second. Imagine someone just hands you $1 million gift, something you did absolutely nothing to earn. How would you feel? Why should receiving God's mercy make people humble instead of proud? Let's look at this direct contrast. The world's view tells us to embrace pride, bragging, and believing you are chosen because you're somehow better, smarter, or, I don't know, more deserving than others. But the kingdom's view? That is all about humility. It's recognizing that you are invited simply because God is gracious and faithful. The Gentiles weren't invited into God's mercy because they were somehow superior. They were invited because God is relentlessly good. When you realize your salvation relies completely on God's grace and not your own perfection, well, it literally leaves zero room for pride.
Because of that, everyone who receives God's mercy has a responsibility. Step 1 is humility. We drop the pride completely. Step 2 is obedience. We actually listen to the God who saved us. And step 3 is living a life that pleases the Father. We don't do these things to try and earn the open door, right? We do them because we're so incredibly thankful that the door was opened for us in the very first place.
And that brings us to our final section, the godly learner, wisdom and morality. I want to zoom out and connect this massive biblical truth directly to your educational journey here today.
Paul wrote a little earlier in the book of Romans that keeping the mind spiritually minded leads to life and peace. This is absolutely foundational for you as a student. True life, true success, it doesn't just come from raw intelligence or getting straight A's. It comes from having a spiritually minded focus. And this brilliantly illustrates the core philosophy of what we do right here. At HeroesMart Academy, we purposely intertwine biblical morality with your education. Why? Because education without morality can actually hurt you and those around you. Being smart just isn't enough, guys. Knowledge and intelligence should help you make wise, God-honoring choices, rather than simply making you more capable of doing whatever you want. We want you to be wise, not just capable. We want your intelligence guided by the exact same humility and grace we just talked about in Romans 11.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, really vital question to think about. Will you pursue academic excellence today while keeping your mind centered on God, truth, wisdom, and righteous choices? Remember that open door of mercy you've been invited through. Let that amazing grace make you humble, let it make you obedient, and let it drive you to be a truly godly learner in absolutely everything you do today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, 8th graders. Now go out there and make some wise choices.